No Jordan Marshall? No problem. Ohio State recently picked up a commitment from one of the best running backs in the 2024 recruiting class. James People says he's leaving the Lone Star State to play football in Columbus.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes for the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Wednesday, April 5th in the year 2023, and I want to thank you for making Locked On Buckeyes your first listen or first watch of every single day. During today's episode, we welcome back to the show John Garcia Jr. John is Locked On's football recruiting insider. John and I go in depth about Ohio State's recent commitment from four-star running back James Peoples out of the state of Texas. We also talk about how the Buckeyes might get a commitment from a Columbus kid from Pickerington North High School, Sam Williams-Dixon. John has mentioned Williams-Dixon twice over the past couple weeks when John's been on with us, and he hasn't been a part of the group of players we're going to discuss during those particular shows. But today, we go in depth about Williams-Dixon and what he is as a football player and what the Buckeyes would get if he commits to Ohio State as well. And joining us now, here on Locked On Buckeyes, it's our favorite guy to talk about Buckeye recruiting with. It's John Garcia Jr. He is Locked On's football recruiting insider. There was a commitment over the weekend and a Buckeye that's a potential Buckeye player who might commit to Ohio State in the future, who's in state, actually in Columbus, who John and I will talk about today. John, what's going on, man? How you doing?
I'm doing well. Not as well as your audience. This run that Ohio State is on is strong, and it looks like more is on the way. I'm sure we'll talk about that at the right time. But yeah, the Buckeyes are hot on the trail right now, and this running back James Peoples is a really big deal. So excited.
The trail is hot. The commits are coming in. They had the Armstrong twins, in-state prospects that committed about a week and a half ago maybe, and then over the weekend, James Peoples. Now, it would have been an April Fool's joke to some if he committed on April Fool's Day, but he committed on April the 2nd. James Peoples, running back out of San Antonio, Texas, is coming up to the Midwest to play football in the near future. He chose Ohio State over some big names, so it's really a big thing for Ohio State to get this guy this time of year.
100%. And look, we talk about it all the time, Jay. Ohio State, to be successful, has to recruit nationally, and one of those strongholds is the state of Texas. You can probably name any recent good Buckeyes roster, and there's going to be a Texan that stands out. You can go back to JT Barrett, certainly J.K. Dobbins, even a Baron Browning, a Jeff Okuda. I mean, there's a lot of big-time Texans, Garrett Wilson, that have come up to Columbus and really made an impression. So there is a true pipeline there, and that state is wide open. So you can go in and compete with the Longhorns like you couldn't do 10, 15 years ago.
Correct.
And Ohio State continues to show that prowess, and this is another great get for the Buckeyes. We talked about sort of the optics of losing Marshall, the in-state running back, to the rival Wolverines. And I think this is immediate response stuff. You know, they won't admit it. Alford won't admit it. Hartline won't admit it. But this comes optically as a nice rebound in losing Marshall. Peoples is right there from a running back perspective, right with him. Obviously, great competition in the San Antonio area and ultra productive. 2,000 yards as a junior this past season. And like you said, Jay, really blew up as a national recruit, not only with Ohio State and Penn State, some of the out-of-state schools, but of course, Texas was heavy in on him, trying to keep him close to home. A lot of SEC programs got in on Peoples to try to grab him in the near future as well. But Ohio State got him on campus early and often, multiple visits to Columbus on his own dime. And look, when I saw him rocking the custom scarlet and gray Crocs in that one photo he posted, I'm like, this is over. He's going to Ohio State. And good on him for not doing it on April Fool's, because in our industry and recruiting, it's a rough day. April Fool's is a rough day on social media. A lot of recruits every year take advantage, post fake commitments, fake commitment dates, so much garbage. So kudos on Peoples for moving it to the next day. But nobody was really surprised that he became a Buckeye over the weekend, and a huge way to kick off the month of April, as you mentioned.
It's huge. It's a huge thing. And you mentioned the Jordan Marshall and him committing to the rival school. It's something like Ryan Day and Tony Alford are like, look, y'all could have it. Like, not saying y'all could have him like he's just a wasted talent. I'm not saying that, but he's like, if you guys can take an in-state guy, okay, cool. We've been focusing a lot on the in-state Midwest stuff. Let's go down to the state of Texas that produces so much talent, sometimes at every position, year in and year out, and bring this kid up here. And John, I look at him, and I always like to look and see what other things you do as an athlete. And I got some stats here that are kind of mind-boggling and blowing my mind as well from what he did this past season. But he was a track guy. Now, I don't know if he ran track or if he's running track right now, which is his junior year. So I don't know if he's running track now, but ran track freshman year, ran track sophomore year, 15.81 to the 110 hurdles, 21 feet plus in the long jump. Now, those might not be state championship winning numbers. That's great. But he is still doing something in another sport that's helping him in football. But John, I've also seen him, and I've seen how that stuff translates to the football field. So I love the connection from freshman, sophomore running track and how he's able to put those skills and utilize them on the football field every Friday night.
What I like about how Peoples uses that translation is he gets to top speed in a hurry. You know, there's not a lot of wasted motion in a lot of these modern spread RPO type systems. You're kind of waiting for the running back to get going. You're like, come on, let's go, hit the hole, press it. James does that very, very quickly, gets to top speed really sometimes before the second level defenders get a hand on him. And then you mentioned it. He's got a lot of long speed and top end speed on top of that. So oftentimes he's running away from defensive backs. So he's got a bit of an upright motion, upright form, I should say, with the ball in his hands. Not something we harp on as much from an evaluation perspective as we used to. We used to talk about I formation, low pad level coming through, delivering punishment after your fullback leads the way. It's a different game nowadays. You can play with more of an upright style and still be incredibly successful, especially if you can pick them up and put them down and run. And Peoples in the open field, I would say he's quicker and faster than those track and field marks may suggest. And he's doing so on a pretty solid frame, 6 foot, right around 200 pounds. So he's carrying good weight on top of that. And he's breaking arm tackles in the process. So I think you got a lot of big playability in this type of running back. He's comfortable out of the backfield as a receiver as well, though he's a no-doubter, downhill, press the hole and explode type of back. And obviously in any scheme, that's big, but especially big in a spread, wide-open offense like Ohio State wants to run.
John, I know when I was coming up in high school, we used to always look at rivals. That was the big recruiting database back then. And there was different categories, quarterbacks. You had your dual threat quarterback. You had your pro-style quarterback. And I don't remember all the different things for running backs, but sometimes there was an all-purpose back, and there was another description for a guy in the running back department because you wanted to try to say, yeah, this is their position, but this is their style. Would you describe James Peoples as an all-purpose back?
I would. There's plenty of samples of him catching the football on tape, even split out as a slot receiver or a wide receiver. His bread and butter is certainly, pressing the hole with the ball in his hands, but getting it to him in other ways is certainly within his skill set. And look, another year of high school ball ahead of him in 2023. So I think he could polish that up even more so and really display some 3-down ability as a blocker and as a receiver. But there's no doubt that he's got a lot of modern traits, again, already in a wide open spread offense. So he already is familiar and excels in that sort of dynamic, which again is not typical. A lot of these great high school running backs are in offenses that are like, hey, we have a blue chip running back. We're going to give him the football. So what do you get? Wing T, single wing, I formation. You get heavier offensive styles that are a little bit more old school. So to have it with a back that is still the bell cow of his high school program, but from a spread perspective, I think is really it's easier to translate that to what Ohio State does, because he's going to be patrolling that position similarly when he does get to the collegiate level. But there's no doubt there is all-purpose 3-down value in what Peoples brings to the table, and I think it's something that he will actually enhance as a senior, and certainly when he gets to Columbus for good thereafter.
What would you say are a couple weaknesses in his game?
Yeah, that upright style. I'm old school a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't shudder at it, but I still nitpick it just a little bit. So I do think it creates a bit of a wider target area. But look, he compensates for it. He's fast. He's got this subtle quickness to him where it's not going to be a Noel Devine, Tavon Austin kind of juke that makes a guy, cross over and break his ankles. But he can eliminate those angles with subtle movement, and he's physical enough to break some arm tackles. So that pad level isn't, again, as big of a worry as it used to be. And he's so explosive and such a big play threat that we don't get on his tape a lot of short yardage, goal line, let's be gritty and physical, Ezekiel Elliott style of runs on his tape. But again, that could be a product of circumstance just as much as anything else. So I do think he's got the frame and the physicality and surely the athleticism to play a little bit more physically. And that's where I like running backs to be hurdlers, because what are you doing? You gotta have a high center of gravity and balance on top of it, right? So you've got to get your knees, your hips, everything up really high while running full speed. And I think that's a great trait for running backs, because you always hear coaches, high knees, get your knees high, tuck the football. That's something that's going to help him break more tackles physically when he gets into the Big Ten and ahead of Big Ten ball, because obviously it becomes much more of a necessity than it does, playing high school ball in San Antonio.
John, the hurdles, the 110 hurdles, the 300s. I know some people do 400s. I used to go to track events. I like watching track meets on TV every now and then. It's kind of some casual viewing this time of year. It's never my favorite thing to watch. It's sometimes I can watch and say, oh, it's smooth, it's going over, but it's never really as exciting as 100 or the 200. I love the 4x4 myself, but the 110 stuff, it's great for a running back. You mentioned the high knees, but it's also, as you say, that balance and the ability to jump over, but you can't jump over and get off step and have an extra step, because you're going to throw off your entire cadence. And I see that a lot with this young man. And I hope and I wonder if this can translate. Now, you mentioned also the running style. I thought Darren McFadden, because I heard people always say he had an upright style.
Yep. And he was taller than Peoples. Yep.
To me, that's dangerous. Like that big target that you're opening yourself up to, that's dangerous, because you mentioned Big Ten ball, just football in general. Ohio State plays Notre Dame coming up. I believe they have a home-and-home scheduled with Texas. USC and UCLA are joined to the Big Ten. Like, you're playing some big boy football. So that upright style, I know Tony Alford's like, look, you're really good, man. But Tony Alford's going to be like, look, we got to work on this, because I don't want to lose you your freshman year because your chest is open and exposed to all these brutal hits.
Yeah, and look, we're nitpicking a little bit, but look, when you're a blue chip recruit, 4-star, Ohio State kind of recruit, this is what we do from an evaluation perspective. So if that's where we're spending our time, it could be a lot worse, right? We could say, hey, there's no juice, there's no physicality, there's no speed, there's no big playability. This is kind of a serviceable back, not a lead back. We're not saying any of those things in particular. But yeah, if we want to nitpick, the style is upright. But we've seen NFL backs doing that. Like you said, Darren McFadden, TJ Yeldon comes to mind for me. Very upright style. Another guy who was like 6'1", who ran that way. So I do think he compensates for it with legitimate athleticism and top-end speed. But look, Tony Alford's Tony Alford for a reason, right? He's going to coach that the right way there at O State. So I'm not too worried about it. But yeah, I think physicality and upright style are areas for improvement more than weaknesses.
The Buckeyes went outside of the Midwest, outside of the state of Ohio to get James Peoples. But there's a guy that's right there in Columbus that's really high on the Buckeyes' radar at this point in time. It's Sam Williams-Dixon from Pickerington North High School. And I think the last two times we've had John on, this name has come up. And it hasn't been me saying, John, this is on our list of guys to talk about. No, John has just been throwing this name out there for a particular reason. John, why do you love Sam Williams-Dixon, and why do you think Ohio State loves him as well?
Because he's just a gritty back.
Yeah.
I think he's easy to root for because he brings some of the counter to what Peoples theoretically brings. Uncommitted right now, although he's talking about a spring decision, Ohio State, Penn State, Kentucky. Miami's trying to get involved here, which is interesting to me. So another national recruit, even though he's an Ohioan, but he's a gritty back. And he's got speed to burn as well. He's a great kick returner. He split outs and runs fades as a wide receiver. So there's legitimate all-purpose and three-down ability and top-end speed, but there's a lot of grit here as well. Very good short area quickness, low pad level, explosive in short spaces. We do get more short yardage samples on his tape relative to people. So I actually think it's great from the Ohio State perspective. And look, you're in state, you want him. He's a back, Tony Alford, all the stuff we just mentioned. You're going to be the favorite going into a spring decision unless something changes in very short order. This is what you build. When you bring in two players at the same position, you want that variance. So if Peoples is your change of pace, 3-down home run hitter, Dixon could be your first and second down, more conventional in between the tackles type, who brings a little bit more physicality to the table. And they're very similar from a size perspective as well. They're both in that 5'11", 200 pound, 6 foot, 200 pound range. So I like that as well. Kind of blank slates from a physical perspective, but not to the point where you're like, oh man, they're too small to play in the Big Ten, to play Notre Dame, to play Michigan, to play Penn State, etc. So I really like the floor from both of these backs, and they do balance each other out if they are to become sort of the 1-2 punch one day there in Columbus. But Williams-Dixon, again, in-state, gritty kid from the inner city who has since moved to Columbus. And the last time I talked to him about Ohio State in particular, he said they hadn't really recruited a back like that. You know, he actually mentioned Archie Griffin as one of the last kind of inner city backs that they've brought in from his area. So fascinating story behind him as well. And you see that grit play out on tape. And that's just something that's easy to root for.
You know, I was looking at and thinking about Ohio State potentially bringing in two guys in this recruiting class. And we talked about how there's Deontay Trainum or Chip Trainum, the transfer from Arizona State, who's there at Ohio State. Travion Henderson, you got Mayan Williams, you got Evan Pryor, you got Dallin Hayden, you got a couple, Hartson, the walk-on running back this year, you got TC Coffey. The running back room is loaded. A couple walk-ons who could play in mop-up duty this season. You got 4 or 5 guys that can potentially be starters or backups at any school in the country. So I'm thinking about these two guys together, and a waiver really Williams-Dixon to get on the field earlier than maybe expected, could be special teams. Now, I'm not saying he's going to come out here and be on every special teams this freshman year. Don't get me wrong, but Chris Olave made a name for himself and really helped the Buckeyes fall in love with him by blocking a punt against Michigan his freshman year. I saw his highlight film and clips of Williams-Dixon. He blocked, I believe it was a field goal, and then his teammate, I believe, ran that thing back. And so if you want to make a name for yourself, when you know that you're walking into a room which is literally littered with elite talent, walking into a room with one of the best running back coaches in the country, and you know you're an incoming freshman that's not going to play, how can you get on the field early? Special teams. And that's a way to not only get on the field, but also to get the eyes of Tony Alford saying, oh, this man's grinding on the special teams. Maybe we can work him a little bit more and see, is he ready earlier than expected to get on the field at running back? So if he's going to come in and be coming in with Peoples, great. I would love this duo. But, buddy, stick with that special teams mindset. Go out there and do those things. You block a kick or two, or maybe he's a gunner. I don't know, John. But whatever he is, he comes out there and plays specials. Man, that's a great way to get every coach's eye and say, oh, he's doing this. Maybe we should think about putting him on the field at running back earlier than we thought we would when we were recruiting him.
That's a great point, Jay. And yeah, he's got a lot of special teams reps on his tape. You mentioned the block kicks. He's returning kicks and punts there as well. So there's a lot of experience. And we mentioned earlier, he's a football player. He's lining up as a traditional receiver, catching 60-yard passes down the field. So there's just a lot of just football player in the game of Sam Williams-Dixon. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of his. And he brings the grit on top of it and the physicality. So, yeah, there's a lot to like there, even though he won't be the 5-star Travion Henderson flashy player of the year All-American. Still a lot to like, and obviously close to home, right? He emphasizes that Ohio Midwestern angle that we are clearly seeing from the coaching staff this cycle. And again, if he does pick Ohio State, he reemphasizes that rebound, that pivot after losing out on another big in-state target. And I think we'll track those two, as journalists, we'll just track those two going forward, right? The two best backs in Ohio, one goes to O State, one goes to Michigan. How do they perform in college? How does it go thereafter? That will be fascinating to track, and it'll be an inevitable conversation and comparison for both of them.
John, two more things for you. One of them is going to be the same question or similar question that I ask about people's. What are some weaknesses in Sam Williams-Dixon's game?
Yeah, I think he's got a lot of creative energy, I like to call it. He'll spin out of something, reverse field, play a lot of lateral ball, stiff arm. There's just a lot in his toolbox. So I think sometimes on tape, you want him to kind of stick to plan A. Hey, just hit the hole and grab your 8 yards, as opposed to reversing field and kind of getting a little too ambitious at times. We talk about it a lot more at quarterback and some of these other positions, maybe guys who are turnover worthy because they're gunslingers. I can fit the ball in that little window, but we see that at other positions as well. And Williams-Dixon, again, that grit, that mentality of, hey, I'm never getting tackled, can sometimes be a negative, and maybe you lose yards. Maybe you work laterally instead of north-south at different points. So I just think kind of the ambition in his game can be a plus and a minus given a situation. 4th and 1, if that hole isn't there, press it anyway, instead of bouncing it outside and potentially losing yards or whatever it is. But again, those are all coaching points, right? If we're talking about lowering your pad level or bouncing versus staying on the hole, those are mental situations, which is exactly what you want. You don't want it to be a physical limitation where, hey, this guy's slow. He's a slow back. He's kind of takes a while to get going. Those physical limitations, if we were able to see them on tape, I think would be much bigger detractors than something that's mental and frankly coachable, right? Again, all these guys have another year of high school ball, and then you get Tony Alford every day. So you're going to get a lot of this kind of coached out of your system early at your Ohio State career. So I do think if that's the starting point for the areas improvement for both of these potential Buckeye backs, that's ideal and kind of reemphasizes why both of these guys are so high on the board and why both of these guys have been prioritized by the program for a long time.
John, last thing for you. Who or what players could be the next to commit to Ohio State?
Well, if we're looking at it from a timeline perspective, we're recording this April 4th. April 8th is a circled commitment date for Aaron Nolan, quarterback recruit who was just at Ohio State this past weekend. Kind of a formality, but he hadn't received the official offer from the Buckeyes. So naturally, Day and Dennis and Hartline, everybody did it in person while he was in Columbus over the weekend. So I think that formality, that in-person feel hits different, and the tune surrounding Nolan has really shifted. And look, this is a national quarterback recruit, top 100 kid, state champion, who has Bama and Clemson and A&M and Miami, a bunch of schools, Arkansas, high on his list. But Ohio State getting the last visit, extending that offer in person, in a scheme that really fits Nolan's game. This is a true point guard on the field and a lefty, by the way, which will be interesting. I do feel like Ohio State has legitimate momentum for this verbal commitment, and he announced that April 8th commitment date even before taking that trip to Columbus. So you have to wonder how much expectation came with that relative to gaining that Ohio State scholarship offer. And from Ohio State's perspective, you kind of want to nip this in the bud now from a quarterback perspective, right? Because last cycle, ups and downs at the position, Brock Glenn commits and then decommits, ends up at Florida State. this cycle. You've already dealt with that with Dylan Raiola decommitting, I think, back in December. So Ohio State wants to be done in terms of its pursuit for that top quarterback as early as possible. So Nolan setting that April 8th commitment date. Maybe even if Ohio State wasn't ready to extend the offer, maybe that accelerated things. He took the visit. He loved it. There's a lot of, we talk about Texas influence and Florida influence at Ohio State, a lot of Georgia influence there as well, including Nolan's former teammate at Langston Hughes High School, Jelani Thurman, big-time tight end recruit who is surely beating that Ohio State drum to get him to Columbus for good. So I do think the Buckeyes are in the driver's seat, though. Clemson, Miami, A&M, all right there in this recruitment. So that'll be a big one for the Bucs and everyone involved.
John, love having you on the show. The next time we have you on, there's a good chance there'll be one, maybe two players, maybe more than that commit to Ohio State between this time and the next time you and I talk Ohio State recruiting. If you could let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter to stay up to date with everything going on with recruiting, not just the 2024 class, but all the recruits that are getting recruited right now.
Yeah, busy time of year, and we're talking about it a ton on social media. So please follow John Garcia _JR on Twitter, Instagram, and I think everything else.
John's also available on Locked On, all the Locked On college shows. Yes. He talks recruiting. So if you want to get updates on maybe Florida Gators or the Texas Longhorns or Notre Dame or maybe Michigan, John's on all these shows. So be sure to catch up with John on not just here, but all the other shows to know what's going on at other schools around the country in the recruiting as well. You can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. You can send all of your emails to jstevens317@gmail.com. Love having John on. I can't wait to see hear what John has to say the next time he's on because, like I say, there's always a chance we'll be talking about another commit when John and I get together once again. John Garcia, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jay. Always a pleasure.